Welcome back to our next question and answer session with Father Stephen, myself. Hopefully we can get through 2 questions today. So I'm going to jump right in. Hello, Father Stephen. I have a question in regards to how to talk to traditionalists, especially online forums and Facebook pages. Many of the articles and images that the Facebook page shows is very uplifting. However, recently they have been bashing Cardinal Collins and priests for accepting to give Holy Communion on the hand and not on the tongue, saying that the Cardinal has bowed down to secularism and other ridiculous statements. I realize that communion on the tongue is the norm and on the hand is only in special circumstances, which has become accepted reality over the past 50 years. I feel that there is enough hate in the world. The sad things happening in the US is also happening around the world. Some people are posting posts to say, remove statues of Jesus and Mary. If one reads these posts, there is so much of hate behind it. At the same time, there is so much of hate from traditionalists who are hating on the Cardinal. Is there any response I can give to traditionalists who are speaking in hateful terms? Thanks. Now, just to note, this question was written at the end of June, so it's quite some time ago, and things have changed a little bit, but not much. Personally, I didn't really read a lot of articles that were very hateful. The ones I read were very respectful of the Cardinal and kind of just putting forth the traditional view of receiving on the tongue and the fact that the faithful do have a right to receive it. So yes, that is the norm. Receiving on the tongue is the norm. To receive on the hand is a special dispensation. So it's not as if you have 2 equal options. The norm is to receive on the tongue. You have a special dispensation to receive on the hand. And this is why many who are traditional minded are more upset. I think the person is referring especially to those individuals who attend the traditional Latin Rite Mass. And in the traditional Latin Rite Mass, even before the pandemic, it was forbidden to receive on the hand. So now those people are not receiving at all, which is rather unfortunate. So some of you had to wait 3 months to be able to receive, once we got back to church. These people are still not receiving. So it's very unfortunate. I can understand them being concerned about it. We are living in extraordinary times. There is somewhat of a pandemic. Some people are saying it's kind of blown out of proportion, that the number of people dying is really roughly the same as would die from the regular flu. It does seem to be more contagious. It does seem to afflict some people more fully. I read an article recently that doctors now know how to treat the coronavirus, so fewer and fewer people are dying. So even though the amount of people infected is growing, the number of deaths is kind of flattening out. In fact, last week, there were a couple of days where there were no deaths at all from the coronavirus. So it's very positive in regards to the coronavirus. But I think a lot of people are still very, very paranoid. So it's not that the cardinal or various bishops are bowing down to secular powers. It's not the secular powers who are saying you cannot receive communion on the tongue. This is a decision that the cardinal and other bishops made based on the recommendations of so-called health experts. Now it depends which health experts you're talking about, which ones you're listening to. So some will say that communion on the tongue is very likely to spread germs. And there are others who will say that way more germs are spread through the hands. And yes, we sanitize our hands, but still, germs can still pass through the hands. And if communion is given properly on the tongue, there's no danger of touching. So I had celebrated the traditional Latin Rite Mass for 8 years. And in the traditional Latin Rite Mass, when the individuals receive communion, they kneel, as was the tradition. And so they're looking up. And because they're looking up, because they're below me, maybe once or twice in an 8-year period did I touch someone's tongues. It's very rare, very uncommon. In the regular Mass, when people are standing and not standing still, and I have to reach up, much more likely to touch their tongue, especially if they move forward. So if it's done properly, very unlikely that you would touch their tongue or there would be any contact. So personally, I feel that if communion were given properly, as it was traditionally done, it's much safer than giving communion on the hand. Because even now I try not to touch people's hands, but I do. So the decision of the cardinals is based on the experts that they are listening to. It's not the experts telling them what to do. They're making recommendations, but the individual cardinals decide. And I had heard that the cardinals met together to discuss this, and they decided communion on the hand was the best way to go. So most of the bishops went with that. But I do know some bishops have allowed communion on the tongue. They do different things. So in some churches, the ones who receive on the tongue are the last ones to come up. In other churches, they might have 2 different Eucharistic ministers or people distributing communion, which is what we had just before the pandemic. So it's also important to understand that not only are the cardinals or the bishops not being told what to do, but their motivation for deciding the policy they're going to take is based on charity, based on the common good. So if receiving communion on the tongue, if they believe that it's going to lead to more people contracting the virus and spreading it to others, then they want to prevent that. So the reason for their decisions is charity, which is a good thing. It's a wonderful thing to see that. Because it's extraordinary times we are living through, the cardinals have a right to impose this rule, even though the norm is to receive on the tongue. And we as faithful Catholics are obligated to obey the cardinals. And traditionalists have obeyed traditionalist priests. Some of the laity, as you mentioned, are very angry about this and writing all kinds of nasty letters or blogs or whatever it may be. It is okay for us to protest peacefully, to petition the cardinal, to write letters, to do things like that. But to be angry, to be nasty, to call names, to ridicule, to say that, they're being guided by the secular powers that be, I think that's kind of pushing it too far. Now, the person who asked this question mentioned that there's so much hate in the world, and they referred to the riots, statues being toppled and beheaded. And all of that began with injustice towards a black man who was killed. We all know about it. And the blacks felt that they were being treated unjustly in general, because some of these things happen again and again. So they protested. And the blacks, most of them, they wanted to have peaceful protests, but very quickly became violent. And it's been pointed out that others have infiltrated the movement, are pushing their own agenda, and also that these riots are being funded by people who want to topple the government and to change the way things are in society, basically to bring about a new world order, which really would be a new world in which the elite, the very wealthy, the very powerful will rule and everyone else will be subject. So we will lose a lot of freedoms, but the people who are rioting, they don't realize that. So it's kind of unfortunate. And those who feel, or those who are not permitted to receive communion on the tongue, they, like these people, feel that an injustice is being done to them, that their rights are being stepped on or infringed, that they're not allowed to do what is their right, that they're losing some of their religious freedom by not being able to receive on the tongue. And this is why they are so upset. But when they are angry and resort to verbal violence, in many ways they are acting like these rioters who are causing a lot of harm and a lot of damage. So being angry, being hateful, doing wrongs is not going to get us anywhere. In fact, often it will just get the opposite of what we really desire. So it is good to make respectable requests rather, for communion on the tongue, but not to make hateful comments. So how should an individual respond to hateful traditionalists, whether it's in person or online? Well, first of all, I would say be sure to pray for them. Secondly, keep in mind that a lot of these traditionalists, they think they know it all, so they're not going to listen to you. So there's usually no point in trying to talk to them. It's good to be reminded that in the end, it's all about charity. And so they say, well, it's about their love of God, which is first and foremost. Yes, but if we love God, we would also love our neighbor, which means we would love and respect our cardinals and bishops, even when they make mistakes or we may not agree with the decisions that they make. So it would seem that these individuals are neglecting the weightier matters of the law and focusing on certain minute aspects of the law, which is exactly what the Pharisees did. So what can we do for them? As I mentioned, we pray for them, but it is also good for us to remind them, okay, if you have an issue, try to address it respectfully and charitably, which is how Christ tells us to address these issues. Thank you very much for that question, and let's move on to the next question, which is very similar, and I believe it was written by the same person, but that's just speculation on my part. So the next question is, hi, Father Stephen, you mentioned a couple of times in your homilies that those coming to church for Mass on weekdays during this pandemic are more grateful for the Eucharist. How come? I know we are in a pandemic. Some people are still afraid. They buy food, etc. online. Yes, some have forgotten about church and Mass. Can we say for sure that those who are now freer to come to weekday Mass are less appreciative of the Mass? Thanks. So, I had mentioned that some people are more grateful now. There's a saying that absence makes the heart grow fonder. So, during the pandemic, people realized they're deprived of the Mass. We reminded them of the value of the Mass, reminded them of what they were missing. So those people who thought about this and who really missed the Mass and wanted to come back to Mass, yes, they are definitely more appreciative of the Mass and of their ability to receive Holy Communion. And really, it really boils down to love of God and to love of Jesus. If you really love Jesus and you really love Jesus present in the Eucharist, you will want to be with him. You will want to be united with him. You will want to receive him in Holy Communion. So if you were prevented from receiving him for 3 months, of course you're going to have a desire to want to receive him. And of course you will appreciate him more fully now that you are able to receive him. The person is correct. Some people are still afraid to come back. The elderly, those who have compromised immune systems or comorbidities, they're at risk. It's understandable. They should stay away. Some of those people have come back nevertheless. And it's true, some people may not come back, and I think those people who don't come back at all, they probably had very superficial faith. Maybe they were just going through the motions. It was just a habit for them to come to Mass, and now that they stopped coming, they couldn't care less and may not have an intention of coming back. And it may also be due to their continued fears about the coronavirus. Can we say for sure that those who now can come to Mass but don't are less appreciative of the Mass? So can we say for sure that those who now can come to Mass but do not come are less appreciative of the Mass? So no, we cannot say for sure because they may have other reasons for not coming, such as the elderly or those who have weak immune systems. Now, I wasn't entirely sure what the question of the person was, so I answered both possibilities. The other possibility is, can we say that those who now come regularly for weekday Mass are less appreciative now that they are coming regularly? And yes, it's probably true. You know, there's that saying that familiarity breeds contempt. When we're used to something, when we're familiar with it, we take it for granted. We don't appreciate it as much as if we were without. C.S. Lewis, a great Christian author, mentioned that he wrote that we will only truly appreciate something once we have lost it. So in the meantime, we take it for granted. We will only truly appreciate something or someone once we have lost it or lost that person. So we take people in our lives for granted. Well, what if your mom disappeared overnight? What if your siblings disappeared overnight? What if your spouse just died overnight? We would truly miss them. But while they're with us, we tend to take them for granted. And it's very unfortunate. So the same applies to Mass. And this is why that saying of Saint Teresa of Calcutta, Saint Teresa of Calcutta, priest of God, celebrate this Mass as if it were your first Mass, your only Mass, and your last Mass. And that is a saying that we should apply to all of ourselves when we attend Mass. We don't know. That might be our last Mass. So we should really celebrate it with great devotion, great attentiveness, and kind of like it might be our last Mass. So our communion with Jesus ought to be the best that it can possibly be. So thank you so much for writing in for these questions. And like I said, I'm trying to get caught up. So we are still quite behind. So hopefully I can get caught up in the next little while. Thank you so much, and God bless you all, and thanks for watching.